Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really rich and intricate world drawn directly from a fascinating set of sources we've been looking at. Our mission, well, it's to distill the essence of what seems like a lifelong obsession. These winding paths of ambition and love and the, surprising ways people truly define happiness. We're seeing it all through the extraordinary lens of one man's relentless pursuit. You've given us a truly compelling narrative here, and we're ready to extract every important nugget of knowledge and insight from it for you.
Absolutely. And what's so powerful about this narrative, I think, is how it lets us explore not just the external stuff, the events shaping these characters, but their profound internal landscapes. Their beliefs, their contradictions, and importantly, how they navigate a world that often just defies all their expectations. We'll trace this single, unwavering thread of longing through, well, decades of life and see how it shapes pretty much everything around it.
Right, so let's start with a truly astonishing moment. Florentino Ariza, he sees Fermina Daza, who's now married, and he makes this fierce, absolute decision. It's not just, I want to win her back. It's this conviction that her husband, Dr. Juvenal Urbino, had to die.
Yeah.
And what makes this so striking is that it's not presented as like an impatient or violent wish. It's profound, almost fated, a resolve he's willing to wait till the end of time for.
That's such a crucial point. What kind of love, or maybe obsession is the better word, could possibly lead to that kind of patient, almost mystical resolve? This isn't about him doing something right away. It's about an unwavering, long-term commitment to one single outcome. The insight here, I think, is how such a deep, maybe even irrational desire becomes this unyielding anchor. It defines every choice he makes, really setting the stage for his entire future.
Okay, so how does this singular, decades-long goal actually influence Florentino's life, especially his career? He starts right at the bottom, reconnecting with his eccentric uncle Leo XII, who, despite being immensely wealthy, is described as a poor man with money. Bit of a character.
Oh, definitely. A genial lunatic, the text calls him, and a hero of river navigation. Believes people give birth to themselves over and over. And he seems to see something in Florentino that maybe others didn't.
Right.
And connecting that to the bigger picture, Florentino's early job as a clerk at the River Company of the Caribbean, the RCC, it presents this really fascinating tension. He's described as a voracious wholesale consumer of literature. His bills of lading were rhymed, his business letters had a lyrical spirit.
Ah, yeah, I remember that.
And his uncle famously quipped, after Florentino said, "Love is the only thing that interests me," his uncle replied, "Without river navigation, there is no love."
A practical sort, despite the eccentricity.
Exactly. It highlights this core tension.
Yeah.
How does a poetic soul like him navigate the mundane world of business? But somehow he rises. Through sheer dedication and tenacity, it kind of proves his father's belief that there was no one with more common sense than a poet.
Hmm.
It's really a testament to how even the most, let's say, romantic idealist can find a path to practical success.
So, with this poetic nature sort of bursting at the seams, fighting against the demands of business, how did Florentino find a real outlet for all that lyricism?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. He turns to the Arcade of the Scribes.
Ah, yes.
And there, he starts writing these scented love notes for people who can't write themselves, the unlettered lovers. And he offers his services free of charge.
Imagine that, pouring your heart out, but for someone else.
And his dedication to it is really fascinating. He developed this knack for crafting unique styles, different handwritings for each client. There's even that instance where he gets caught up in a feverish correspondence with himself, writing for both a shy girl and the boy she loved.
And it worked. They got married because of his letters.
Exactly. He even created this detailed lover's companion, 1,000 letters, 3 volumes, like a dictionary of emotion. It shows this profound, almost analytical understanding of human feeling, even if it's all secondhand for him at this point.
Right.
The irony, of course, is that this huge work never found a publisher because, well, love letters had gone out of fashion. It's quite an insight, isn't it? How someone can master the art of love without necessarily experiencing its reality in the way they truly desire.
So true. Okay, meanwhile, what about Fermina Daza, the object of this whole lifelong obsession? Her marriage to Dr. Juvenal Urbino, it starts in what's called the wrong house, the Palace of Castelduero, and she's under the oppressive thumb of her half-mad mother-in-law, Doña Blanca.
Sounds grim.
Yeah, this woman blames Fermina for everything, imposes these bizarre rules like only eating eggplant in all its forms, which Fermina apparently despises, associated it with poison, and insists on endless piano, then harp lessons. It sounds, frankly, suffocating.
It absolutely does. And the important question is, how did Fermina navigate that? Such a rigid and hostile environment. A text says she initially felt horrified by her own newborn son, which is quite a thing to admit. But eventually she grew to love him through friendship.
Friendship with her son.
Yeah, that's how it's framed. And her public life, it became this performance of victories over the subterranean hostility. She effectively became a transgressor against the established order.
Interesting.
And her insight here is really sharp.
Yeah.
The problem in public life is learning to overcome terror. The problem in married life is learning to overcome boredom. That offers a pretty stark perspective on, societal expectations versus personal reality.
Wow. Yeah.
So the key insight, I think, is that real happiness in these long-term relationships, it often isn't about that initial spark or passion. It's about the quiet, persistent work, mutual adaptation, finding contentment in unexpected places, like, eventually managing to eat pureed eggplant.
Yeah.
That becomes this symbol of reconciliation. Her husband even jokes about naming a daughter Eggplant Urbino.
Right, that miracle of the eggplant. Okay, so while Fermina is finding her, let's call it equilibrium in marriage, Florentino is leading a very, very different life, engaging in what the text calls furtive hunting for love. He developed some rather, cynical theories about women's appearances and their aptitude for love, famously preferring skinny little tadpoles. He even adopted this harsh worldview, believing, as it says, that the world is dividing to those who screw and those who do not. And he found a community in a kind of secret society of discreet lovers.
Yes, and the specific experiences he has during this time, they're really revealing. They shape his understanding of intimacy in profound ways. These relationships seem less about finding the one again and more about understanding the varied facets of love and companionship, almost like research in a way.
How so? What are the examples?
Well, first there's Ausencias and the tenor, a wise older woman, 50 years old. It's a long-term affair where she treated him apparently as if he were nobody.
Strange.
Right. Yet they found this sort of self-absorbed happiness. And then there's that bizarre robbery of her house, everything taken except the bedroom furnishings.
And she wouldn't report it.
Exactly. It reveals this unique perspective she had on material things versus the value she placed on their private world.
Okay. Who else? Then there's Olympia Zuleta. This was a brief, really tragic encounter. She was a pigeon fancier. It began with a thank you note sent by pigeon. Romantic start. Deceptively so. Because Florentino, in a moment of impulse, painted "This pussy is mine" on her belly with red paint.
Oh, no!
Yeah, and her husband found it and tragically cut her throat. That incident haunted Florentino for years, a really harsh lesson in the consequences of impulsive passion.
God, that's dark.
It is. And finally, there was Sarah Noriega. This was one of his longest, most stable affairs. She was a teacher, a poet. She believed in spiritual love from the waist up and physical love from the waist down. A very clear division. But she also openly called Fermina Daza a whore for marrying Urbino for money. And that raw, real-world perspective, it deeply shook Florentino. It ultimately led to their painful breakup. So you see, these encounters, whether quietly fulfilling or tragically destructive, they were all part of his complex, often contradictory, preparation for this one love that still remained just out of reach. Wow. It's quite a tapestry of experiences. Okay, so amidst all these personal dramas and his professional climb, his career is really shaped by another figure, right? Leone Cassiani.
Ah, yes. A remarkable woman.
She started as a charity employee in the confusing general section of the RCC. Sounds like a dead end.
It might have seemed so, but Leona's insight is extraordinary. It's a real highlight. When Uncle Leo XII inspected her section, she just stayed silent, didn't say a word.
Okay.
Then afterwards, she submitted this memorandum, basically stating the general section did not exist. It was pointless and should just be eliminated. Its problems should be sent back to where they originated.
Just pure common sense.
Exactly. Simple, direct common sense. That, combined with her teaching herself English and typing, marked her as exceptional. Uncle Leo starts calling her my namesake Leona, gives her a new position as his personal assistant. She develops this diabolical talent for handling secrets, an indomitable will to power. And she quietly guides Florentino's career for years, becomes his indispensable confidant.
There's that poignant moment between them, too, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Florentino finally asks her, years later, when are we ever going to stop this? Meaning their flirtation, their closeness. And she responds, I would feel as if I were going to bed with the son I never had.
Wow.
It reveals this incredibly profound platonic loyalty, a love that transcended the physical. It allowed them to stay friends, true friends, without crossing that line. And significantly, she became the only human being Florentino was ever tempted to tell his deepest secret about Fermina Daza. That highlights her singular trustworthiness and, the powerful, often unsung role of steadfast support in someone's life.
A really key figure. Now, as time inevitably marches on, Florentino faces something else, his mother's decline. Transito Ariza.
Yes, that's a poignant part. She becomes obsessed with a stolen identity, Little Rochi Martinez, and keeps asking, who am I now? It's quite heartbreaking.
And he eventually has to move her, right, to a quiet room away from the neighborhood's ridicule.
He does. And this experience, seeing his mother fade, it leads to a really powerful personal revelation for Florentino himself. He sees swallows nesting on newly installed electric wires, a symbol of progress, of time passing that he hadn't really registered before.
And it hits him.
It hits him hard.
Yeah.
Damn it, he says, realizing that all happened 30 years ago. This sudden, sharp confrontation with his own aging, having always sort of thought time only passed for other people, it forces him to reevaluate everything, especially his ephemeral love affair with Fermina Daza.
Ephemeral. After all this time.
Well, from the perspective of 30 years passing in a flash, perhaps it felt that way in that moment.
Yeah.
It's a deeply relatable moment, I think, for anyone who suddenly felt that inexorable assault of old age. He finally understands his own visceral shudder, not just looking at his mother, but facing the march of time for himself.
Okay, so bringing it all together, what does this mean for our two protagonists? How do their paths resolve, or at least where do they find themselves? Let's start with Fermina Daza.
Right. Fermina, after those incredibly difficult early years of marriage, she finds her own very distinct form of happiness. She eventually comes to see Dr. Urbino as the man she would have preferred to all the men in the world if she had to choose again, which is quite a statement considering the start.
It really is.
She becomes, as the text says, the absolute monarch of a vast empire of happiness, an empire largely built by and for her husband. She accepts that private life, unlike public life, was fickle and unpredictable.
And she even comes to enjoy eggplant, the ultimate symbol of adaptation.
Exactly. It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? While Florentino's out there accumulating wealth, having all these diverse, romantic, sometimes tragic experiences, often believing he's somehow preparing for Fermina. Fermina is defining her happiness within the actual confines of her marriage. Overcoming that initial disdain for her husband, she recognizes his flaws, his lack of understanding of domestic life. Remember his famous, "this stuff tastes of window" comment about bad tea? But she learns to value their shared reality. And eventually she sees Florentino again, years later, with naturalness. He's no longer connected to that languid adolescence she once knew. Both characters, really, through their vastly different paths, they seem to reach a similar conclusion that it was not possible to live together in any other way or love in any other way, which suggests that maybe happiness isn't about chasing some perfect ideal, but about the practical, evolving, often surprising ways we find contentment with what actually is.
So we've really taken a deep dive today into Florentino's decades-long pursuit of this one singular love, his, let's say, unconventional career path, and this myriad of women who shaped his understanding of intimacy. And we've also explored Fermina's parallel journey through a marriage that started with, well, obligation, maybe even resentment, and somehow blossomed into its own unexpected harmony.
It really reminds us, this deep dive, that love, ambition, personal growth, they're rarely linear, are they? They're almost never what we initially expect them to be. And it compels us, I think, to consider how much of our deepest desires are truly shaped by things outside us, by external circumstances, and how much by our own steadfast, maybe even stubborn internal convictions, regardless of the actual paths we walk.
Right.
When does waiting become its own form of action? And when does it maybe become, well, a way to avoid confronting present realities?
That's a truly powerful thought to leave our listeners with. What surprising truth might you discover about your own journey if you pause and reflect? Reflect on how long you've maybe been waiting for something or someone to truly arrive, and what has that waiting actually shaped in your life? Something to mull over.